Hello, everyone. This is David Hughes. I'm President and CEO of the Natural Step Canada and the Executive Co-Chair of the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition. And I'm very excited to invite you today to our session, which is entitled Business Not As Usual, the Circular Economy as a Post-COVID Recovery and Resiliency Strategy. We're happy you could join us. I think you're going to find this to be an exciting hour of great discussion and presentations. But before we move into describing the session today, I want to introduce you to my co-host for this session, Paul Shorthouse. This event is being brought to you by Globe and the Globe Virtual Series and the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition, and Paul is with Globe. So, Paul, over to you.
Great. Thanks, David. Yes, Paul Shorthouse. I'm a Senior Director with the Delphi Group and the Globe Series, and I'm based out of our Victoria, BC office, beautiful Victoria, BC. Head up our circular economy and green economy related work across the country. Thanks, David.
Yeah, great. So the purpose of today's session really builds off of the work that came out of a session we held on February 13th. In the final day of the Globe Conference out in Vancouver. It was part of the new Globe Advance series that the Globe team has brought to us. And in particular, that session was around the circular economy and how we can advance that as a model for the future. Maybe a number of you were already at that session. We've published a document that outlines the outputs from that session, and we're going to walk you through those briefly in a few minutes. But the world has changed significantly since that time. And as all of you are dealing in different ways with the impacts of COVID-19, it's also affecting our economy, and it's helping us reframe and rethink the discussions we've been having today around a circular economy. And so today's session really want to, in addition to building off of that session in February, we want to pivot the conversation to really start thinking about how the circular economy can be a long-term resiliency strategy for our economy. And so with that, we'll have a number of presentations. We'll be speaking about that in the first part. And then towards the latter half of the event, for the last 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to open it up for questions. And give you all a chance to engage with this topic and ask questions of our panelists. But before we get into that, I want to hand it over to Paul, who's going to walk us through some of the outcomes from that session in February. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, David. Maybe I'll start with a bit of an introduction to our panel as well, just to introduce those of us who are providing some subject matter expertise today. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm just going to run through our very talented lineup here. So we have Frances Edmonds and her role as Head of Sustainable Impact. Frances is responsible for overseeing HP Canada's full suite of corporate social responsibility programs, including strategic partnerships to drive sustainable practices across HP's business and throughout Canada. And I understand from Frances that HP as a company has made a commitment to turn its entire business circular, from its product and parts manufacturing to its broad range of services. So look forward to learning more about that, Frances. We also have Adam Corneal joining us. Adam's a serial entrepreneur who's been running his own construction contracting business for years, and as part of that saw a need for major changes in the demolition industry, and as a result launched Unbuilders in 2018, where he's now the CEO. So Unbuilders is one of Canada's foremost deconstruction companies, which you'll learn a little bit more about today. And for every home that Unbuilders deconstructs, approximately 50 tons of waste are diverted from landfill, with salvage materials being upcycled through donations to charity organizations such as Habitat for Humanity. So Unbuilders is a small organization. They're a team of about 14, but they're looking to expand rapidly across Canada. So looking forward to your input today, Adam, as a small business. We also have Leah Canning with Environment and Climate Change Canada. So Leah joined ECCC in April 2018 as a senior policy analyst, senior policy advisor and undertaking strategic policy development. related to circular economy within the federal government. She's also leading the department's planning for the World Circular Economy Forum that's being held in collaboration with the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. And lastly, but not least, Dr. Tima Bansal. And Tima is a professor of strategy at the Ivey Business School at Western University, as well as the director of Ivey's Center for Building Sustainable Value. She's an executive director and founder of the Network for Business Sustainability, which is a network of about 8,000 researchers and managers from around the world that are committed to advancing sustainable business. And most recently, she's taken on the role as chair of the Council of Canadian Academies' new expert panel on circular economy in Canada. So we're really delighted to have Tima join us, and I know they've just had their first meeting. Tima, could I pass it to you briefly just to give us a quick overview of the expert panel and your mandate?
Paul, I appreciate that. Everybody got excited. This is the first circular economy panel I've sat on, so it's exciting. And I'm even more excited about the expert panel. It was struck by Environment Canada and Climate Change Canada. And it's led by CCA, the Canadian Council of Academies. There's 15 other panelists on it that represent the breadth of Canada's geography as well as sectors. Francis Edmonds, who's here with us today, is also on the panel as well. And we also have 2 international people. The point of the panel is to answer the question, what are the potential opportunities and challenges for a circular economy in Canada? We will have a report that will answer that question by October 2021. So it's about a year and a half down the road. We will solicit input from people around Canada. So I hope that everybody engages with this panel that has the opportunity to help shift not only government's position, but then also, I hope, Canada's position in this space. Thanks, Paul.
That's great. Thank you, Tima. And as David mentioned, I will jump into some of the key takeaways from our advanced session here in just a moment. David, I wonder if we want to just provide a little housekeeping for those that are on the line now in terms of how they can adjust their screens and see video, for example.
Yeah, sure thing, Paul. I was so excited to get to the content that we jumped a step. So for those of you that are new to this platform, you'll see at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen a button. It's probably beside an exclamation mark, and that will give you the chance to see a list of the participants in the call. But if you also want to see faces for those that have their videos on, you can press the thumbnail button. We also see just under that, you'll see a chat box, and you may need to press the little arrow pointing to the right to reveal the chat box. But we want to see your comments and questions throughout the meeting. We also want to encourage you to send notes to each other so that there's some active dialogue between the group on the call. And so please use that freely. And then towards the end, we'll also be using that to look for questions that we will moderate and bring to the broad group and to the panel. And also want to mention that if you're having any kind of technical problems, you can also just send a note through the chat box. It's being monitored by our technical support team, and they will get back to you with any assistance that might be necessary. And finally, just to let you know that this session is being recorded, and this will be provided back to you with various materials coming out of today's session. And then I also just wanted to point out that we had over 500 registrants for the event, and we expect that we've got several hundred people on the line. So it's great turnout, great to see the level of engagement and interest. And we wanted to share with you just a bit of the profile of the people that are on the line. We've got 80% of the participants are coming from Canada, 10% from the United States, and the balance are coming from other parts of the world. We also have 16% of the audience are managers or directors in their respective organizations. 11% are from the C-suite, so CEOs, vice presidents, senior executives. And then 70% really come from a broader spectrum of roles within their various organizations. And in terms of the mix of subject matter expertise or areas of work, it's really all over the map, which is really great because the circular economy requires a very diverse set of portfolios on these issues. It's not something that should be siloed in any one department. And so no group really has more than 10 or 15% of the total profile. We have people that are working in the energy industry, 10%, 15% in the environment. And then we've got lots of consulting and engineering folks, about 11%. And then everything is really spread out over about 15 or 20 categories. So it's great to see the diversity of the group on the line. And we just want to learn a little bit more about who's joining us today, and we'll feed this back to you in a few minutes after we get into the program a little bit. But two polls are going to show up on the screen on your right-hand side. And the first one is asking the question, how would you characterize your level of knowledge on the circular economy? So you should be seeing that now on the screen, and we'd ask you to first click one of the three responses under that first question. And then after you've done that, you can scroll down to the second question, which is, what are you most interested in taking away from today's session in terms of content? And then the third question is, what are the primary barriers or challenges you've encountered in helping your company become more circular? So three questions on the right-hand side. Just scroll down and answer one of those under each of those three questions, and we'll get back to you with the results, and it'll be interesting to see what the makeup and interests are of our group. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Paul, and now we are actually going to do a bit of a run-through of the outputs from our session in February. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'll keep this brief. The Advance brought together about 100 leaders from industry and various subject matter experts to really look at how to accelerate Canada's circular economy transition. The discussions, I think, focused around the key barriers as well as enablers and opportunities on a sector-by-sector basis, but also at the broader systems level. We also use this as a bit of a planning tool for the World Circular Economy Forum, which we talked about here. Getting a little bit of background noise, so if we could just mute lines, that would be great. Participants, they worked in very small groups, looking at the cross-cutting barriers and enablers, and also mapping across sort of themes, including innovation, culture, policy, and macro trends. And we'll share the summary report that's available online with a link to those on this webinar in case you haven't already downloaded it, so you get more detail in there. So I won't get too deep on this, but just wanted to highlight a few of the key takeaways that set us up for today's conversation. I think one of the main things that came out was we need to define Canada's competitive advantage and the path forward in this space, particularly the focus on better understanding Canada's circular economy transition in the context of climate change, recognizing our traditional natural resource-based economy, things such as bioeconomy and how that can underpin, as well as the emerging technology and service sectors that we have in Canada, but also the opportunities for business and communities of all different sizes and across our diverse geographies, because we are a very wide and big country. Some of the top barriers were the lack of harmonized policies, frameworks, and standards, which obviously vary by sector to some degree, but they affect everything from how we design our products to managing our waste and material resources. I think the siloed nature of our sectors or even within industries was raised as a key barrier, given the need for more systems thinking approaches under circular economy. And also the cost challenges are a big issue. So how do we improve the cost of recycled materials or those materials can fetch compared to, say, with extraction of virgin materials? On the flip side, the enabler side, we saw a need for more cross-sector collaboration to realize the opportunities and really keep up with the global transition that's underway, which will help us obviously become more productive, remain competitive over the longer term, and also realize the opportunities and mitigate the risks around that. There's the need for those enhanced or harmonized policies in areas such as procurement, extended producer responsibility, even policies like carbon tax can help to level the playing field for certain products and services. The targeted need for a focus on infrastructure investments to address gaps in areas like remanufacturing or reverse logistics or improved recycling and sorting and separation and organics management. I think what we're seeing out of Europe, for example, investments in innovation and new technologies have a real opportunity here. So how do we use artificial intelligence, for example, or robotics to better sort materials as one example, and just the broader education and awareness piece that's needed with businesses, with consumers, policymakers, and broadly the workforce as skills development opportunity here. So as David mentioned, I think a lot has changed since February in our session at Globe, given the current pandemic, and we're seeing this disruption across the economy really creating some new challenges, but also some opportunities, and I wanted to just highlight a few of those quickly to set up for our panel discussion. What we've heard and what we're seeing, the pandemic is really creating a bigger waste crisis in the immediate term. So impact on things like single-use items, going back to plastic bags, an increase in takeout containers at restaurants, even restaurants moving to disposable menus, masks, gloves, etc. There's also an impact on recycling, and that's compounded somewhat by the oil crisis right now, the cheap oil, which is creating inexpensive virgin plastics and making a harder business case for recycling. And impacts on things like the sharing economy, where you've got car share models that people are concerned about spreading or transmitting viruses. On the flip side, you've got the innovation side, where waste innovation is really creating some new opportunities, and we're seeing businesses pivot quickly to new business models or new ways of manufacturing, and that's not just unique to circular economy, but shows that we can move in that direction if we put our minds to it. And we're seeing companies like Loop, which are using reusable containers for home delivery, and really growing that opportunity. And also the virtual platform piece, where we're looking at shifting to services online, for example, provides some opportunities. And we're also seeing a refocusing of supply chains to more localized supply chains, food system resiliency, for example. So I think that's what I wanted to highlight, and that we can just maybe take a moment to look at the results from our polling, and then we'll get into the discussion with our panelists. So you see on the right-hand side here, the results, and we've got a mix of people on the line, fairly generally well-informed audience, about half of you, some subject matter experts, and those that are here sort of just learning about the opportunities. There's some real interest in the business models, but also the policy enablers and how COVID might impact on some of this transition. And it looks like a good mix of interest in terms of where the barriers and challenges here. So we'll try to follow up and focus our conversations around this as part of this session and the Q&A that comes forward. So David, maybe I'll pass it back to you, and we can jump in some conversation with our esteemed panel. David, maybe on mute. Hi, David.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
There we go. Sorry about that. So we are about to turn now to our panel. You've heard enough from Paul and I, and we really want to hear from this wonderful panel. We're going to start off with a question that will be directed first to Tima, then Francis, and then Adam. And it is to ask each of you to give us a 2-minute elevator pitch that addresses the question, why do you think advancing a circular economy makes sense for Canada as a long-term resiliency strategy? So over first to Tima.
Thank you, David. Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm an academic after all, so I'm going to start with why we shouldn't. And I'll tell you why we shouldn't is because we have so much cheap natural resources. And in fact, it's almost always cheaper to extract, to make, and to waste. And in fact, that's going to fuel our GDP. So why do it, right? Higher GDP, the more that we extract waste and make waste. And ecologically, we have lots of space, we have lots of water, we have natural resources. In fact, our footprint is almost equal to our waste extraction. So, you know, there's this wonderful space relative to population. So I'll tell you why we do need to do it, because well, to understand why we need to do it, actually there's two things that we need to understand. One is that new products require natural resources. Okay, so the whole circular economy is about the real resources. It's about the stuff that we use. And so that's going to be critical, and Canada's economy is based on stuff. 20% of what we produce, or our GDP, is related to stuff, and so get that right, we will change the way that we operate. And the second one is that to make the circular economy work, we need new relationships, new collaborations, new systems, as what Paul was talking about. Okay, so we need to deal with our stuff differently, we need innovation, and we need collaboration. Okay, so why should we do it? Given that we don't really have that burning platform, I'll tell you two reasons. One is that there's a huge, huge opportunity space here. That opportunity is going to come with the innovation piece. We need new products. To make the circular economy work, products have to be manufactured differently. We have to think about how we manufacture, what we manufacture, and then how we dispose of it. And that's going to create new relationships. That's going to create new innovation. And in that process of building better relationships, tighter relationships, we will also ultimately build resiliency. And I think the only other point that I want to make is that if we don't do it, we're in serious trouble. We are already seeing a boom and bust economy. And with the boom and bust economy, which is so based on natural resources, that if we don't move this way and the rest of the world does, which is where they're going, we will be left behind as a country. My elevator pitch. Thanks, David.
That's great, Tima. Frances, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. So I love the way that Tima framed that, because many Canadians do feel that, you know, we have a resource-based economy and we've got lots of space, and that really is a sentiment. But she honed in very clearly on the need to keep up with the rest of the world. If you think about it, you know, last year we extracted 100 billion tons of material out of the planet. And the UN says that extraction for both mining and farming resulted in 50% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and 80% of the species loss. And many people are equating COVID, our first sort of, for our generation, the first pandemic we're facing, to be related to over-extraction, chopping down tropical rainforests. So even if we're okay in our own country from the resources that we're extracting, the impacts that are going globally, because of course we are part of global supply chains, are already causing problems that Canada's feeling. We're warming at 3 times the rate of any other country. We are experiencing the pandemic that, you know, is related to cutting down forests and exposure to new viruses. So even if we thought we were immune, because of our global connectivity, we are not. And obviously the atmosphere is a global atmosphere, so we're all going to be impacted by it. So those points alone should be spurring us into action. And I love the competitive angle. It is so critical in a globalized economy to be competitive. Speaking as a global corporation, we see the need for that globally too. So that would be my pitch.
Thanks, Frances. And now on to someone who does an awful lot of stuff with stuff, and that would be Adam.
Yeah, thanks, David. So, I mean, to be blunt, the circular economy is the model of the future. And this is something that we've premised our businesses on. And there's no doubt that this is the way that we need to move forward. So not only is it maximizing resources by circulating them over and over, therefore lowering how many resources you put into the market, but also it's taking down consumption if this is done properly. So it's a combination of circular resources, but also the systems that come into place. So you know, I'm in the construction industry, and We don't innovate often in our industry. Less than 2% goes into R&D, one of the lowest in any industry. And we're still building single-use buildings, with single-use products on a mass level. So I'm really excited about that because I see massive need for innovation and opportunity for innovation, especially in my sector. And on top of that, what we do at Unbuilders is we're not just recovering a low-value material. We're recovering primarily old-growth lumber. So there's a high-value material that's literally being thrown in the garbage right now, a resource that's scarce. It won't grow back for 500 to 2,000 years, the trees and lumber we're recovering. So it makes even less sense than other industries where we're basically like throwing diamonds in the garbage. So there's a lot of reasons why circularity is beneficial, and especially what we do. It's the only clear path forward.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, I'd like to dig in a little bit further. I think you've raised some interesting points there. And maybe Tima, if we could go to you next, and just want to get a sense of what new opportunities you're seeing coming out of the current crisis, obviously in the near term, but in a way that might help to accelerate the transition to a more circular economy in Canada.
It's a great question, Paul. I bet you most of the participants here, especially those who are in business, are facing two situations right now. Either they're still in crisis mode and they're just trying to figure out how to survive, or they understand that they can probably make it through this crisis and they're planning for the future. I'm going to suggest that the opportunity, I'm only going to give one solution. I'm going to suggest that the opportunity lies in what I'm going to call foresighting. What we do when we plan is that we anchor on the past and we say, this is what we were and how do we plan for the future. If we're going to transition to a circular economy, we have to foresight. We have to say, what does that future look like? And once you know what the future looks like, then you figure out how to get there. And that's a very different mode of thinking about your business. And so if the future looks circular, what is my role in that future? And the reason why that's important is that it dislodges us from the past and it brings people together for a common vision. People who don't always share the vision will start to come together, and when they come together, they will know the place that they hold in this, and then we can realize that future. And I'm going to give you my example of even our students. At the business school, what's most on their mind? Well, we're no longer in the classroom, we're doing this. And it was so much nicer being in the classroom. And they're saying, well, how do we get back to the classroom? What we could be saying is, how are we going to look like in the future if we have to blend technology with the real world or with a physical environment? And we can't return back to the past. If we don't return to the past, what does that look like in the future? So if I were to say the one thing that will lead to transitions is to foresight, is to get people in your business together to think about the future, and then when you do that, you will envision a very different future.
That's great. It's some big picture stuff to sort of start thinking cross sectors as we've been talking about. I wonder if we can go to our business corporate perspectives on this panel too, because one of the things the audience seems to want to learn about are business models. National Zero Waste Council put out a really good circular economy business toolkit that showcased 5 different circular business models. And I'm wondering, maybe Adam and Francis, you can speak a bit to how adopting a circular economy lens to your business models or your supply chain or your products and services has helped your company become more resilient during the current pandemic and more broadly. So maybe Adam, over to you, and then Francis, if I could. And I'll share that toolkit online for people as part of the chat.
Sure. So for us, the challenge that we've taken on, the mountain that we're climbing, is taking on the demolition industry head on. And so it's a two-staged challenge, because not only are we disrupting the service itself by offering an alternative, which is deconstruction, or unbuilding as we call it. So we deconstruct buildings, tear them layer by layer, but then you have the back end of what to do with these materials. So it's not as straightforward as just starting a business where you see maybe a need or a gap in the market. We've had to look at both sides of it because there's not major players on either end. So that adds extra challenge, and that's why we have two companies, because we have Unbilled and then we have Heritage Lumber, which is actually brokering the material we're recovering. Because if we push hard on both policy and the industry to make this shift, which we are, and the shift happens and you all of a sudden have a massive abundance of reclaimed wood in the supply chain and reclaimed products, and no one that wants them, the demand isn't there, you're not really solving an issue, you're creating another issue. So we have to simultaneously deal with the supply and demand of the product we're recovering while shifting the industry itself. So again, it's a big mountain to climb, but we're young and ambitious and taking it on and growing quickly. And because of that challenge, it makes us have to reach out and collaborate and partner with a lot of different organizations. We have some great partnerships with Habitat for Humanity, a lot of different industry partners as well on both sides, on both the service and the product side, and that's what's required to really make this big shift happen. And one last thing, just quickly to talk about what that transition looks like. I see it in 4 stages. First is awareness, defining the problem. For us, demolition, massive amounts of waste. Plan, so come up with a solution. And then push on policy to see if it will support that solution, which we've had success in. And then last, the industry will shift, and they will. If you can show a better model and people want it, slowly things will shift.
Okay, and to build on top of that, I love that demand generation perspective because that's a key piece here. So a few things that HP's been doing prior to COVID, we had set a 30% post-consumer recycled content plastic goal across our entire product portfolio in print and PC. And in order to be sure that we could meet the demand for the amount of plastic that would create, we had already been building resilient closed-loop plastics supply chains actually here in Canada, which is pretty exciting. And so being able to continue with that during the COVID crisis, which is severely disrupting supply chains, really speaks to the strength of our supply chain and the depth of partnerships that we had worked on to build that. So that collaboration theme for circular economy is so important. Second one I wanted to point was HP is heavily invested into 3D printing, and of course having an infinite inventory of spare parts is pretty exciting, which is what 3D print enables. But we've been able to step into the COVID emergency in a couple of ways through our circular strategy. And the first one was to make shorten and localized supply chains for PPE. And the first example was making the face shields. The headband attachment for the face shields can be 3D printed. And so we're now 3D printing those through our partners. And what we did was we made the design for that open source, so anybody anywhere in the world could print those locally and get that personal protective equipment to frontline workers, which is pretty exciting. And then lastly, and this is an interesting way to look at it, we have an education crisis right now for technology. We have youth across Canada trying to study from home when they don't have access to technology. And 3 months ago, if you had said HP's brand should be on used computers that are not in very good quality and just barely good enough to get a youth online, would that have been something our brand would have facilitated or helped with? And the answer would have been no. But post-COVID, how can we fix this problem? How can we step as a responsible company to get technology to the youth that are trying to study at home? So we've actually released a piece of software called HP Refresh. I encourage everybody on the line to think about this. Most of you probably have an older Windows-based computer sitting around that could be repurposed for a youth in need. And it's just a question of ensuring data privacy by wiping it clean with this HP Refresh software, and then physically sanitizing it, getting basic operating system back up and running, which we've provided through this HP Refresh software, and you can then donate that laptop to a youth in need. So I really encourage you to go to the HP Refresh site and participate in this. And this is extending product life cycles, very important part of the circular economy. So over to you guys.
Great. Fascinating way that you guys have set up those models and sort of looking at new products and services to address those gaps and opportunities. We're getting some great questions coming in through the chat box, and we'll go to those in just a minute. I don't want to leave Leah waiting any longer because we really want to hear, Leah, what you're seeing. And obviously, the pandemic's probably impacting on your current focus, and we want to learn a little bit more about how the World Circular Economy Forum plans to host that in Canada have shifted.
Great, thanks, Paul. Maybe just quickly for the benefit of those on the line, the World Circular Economy Forum, if you haven't heard of it, is a large global event that was created by Sitra, an organization based in Finland. And its purpose is really to bring together circular economy leaders from around the world to share the best circular economy solutions so we can learn from each other, scale up, and drive impact. So Canada will have the pleasure of hosting the World Circular Economy Forum. We were going to host it this fall in Toronto. We have had to postpone to 2021 as a result of the pandemic. Dates will be announced very shortly, so please stay tuned. In the meantime, though, I'm really happy to share, Paul, that Citra will be organizing a virtual World Circular Economy Forum online that will take place during the original dates we had planned this September. And it will really focus on exactly this question we're asking today: how can the circular economy really support our economic recovery, reboot economies in a post-COVID-19 world, and taking that lens from a global perspective. So it will be open to everyone. There'll be different sessions targeting different global regions, and including one on with North America focus that our colleagues at the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition, including David, will play a key role in delivering.
Great, thanks for that update. David, maybe I'll pass it to you. We'll go to the Q&A questions in a minute, but love to hear a little bit about policy and infrastructure needs and gaps.
That's right. Thanks, Paul. So in order to make transition happen, it doesn't happen automatically. It sometimes requires a bit of a push or a catalyst and support from various places. So the question to the panelists,
Oh, I might have lost David. Can people still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll pitch the question then. And it's more around policy and investment priorities that you think should be front and center for overcoming the barriers to support recovery efforts and really ensuring the long-term resiliency. So maybe, Tima, if you want to just give your thoughts on where there's a need for us to focus in terms of policy or investment priorities.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to focus first on government. I think in terms of public policy, there's a few things. One is that we need to price resources differently. So you have to price both the extraction and the waste. And I know that taxes are never sexy or deemed acceptable by civil society, but I think that pricing is going to be important. When you see negative oil prices, then inevitably it stimulates the use of fossil fuels. And so the government has to take a position on pricing. The second one is I think that there needs to be incentives on collaboration and innovation. And if we're never going to make circularity work if there's no opportunity to innovate. So on that, the fiscal stimulus packages, for example, seem to, once again, reinforce what we've done. And even the wage subsidy programs are saying, you know, we do what we have been doing and keep everything the same. But they could have fiscal stimulus that's also directed at those companies that can show a shift towards circularity or reducing their environmental footprint or innovation, receive more of the funds. A third way that the government could move forward is on circularity, works with better information, better feedback, and so the government can play a role in ensuring that people have more information about the waste that's produced at a very granular level, and then giving that feedback right away to the organizations that are involved. And so I think that would stimulate it. On the corporate side, I think that the one thing that's most challenging for companies, because I think companies want to be innovative by their very nature, the most difficult thing is in the collaboration and the co-creation and the co-development. And I think to move circularity forward is this willing to deal with IP issues, it's this willingness to share in the development of new products so that we don't have products go to waste, but that they are reused. And Adam made that wonderful point about meeting new customers that value this type of product. I think that's key. Francis raised a point about having materials that are sitting in people's basements, computers, and so this new type of system needs to be done, and that needs new forms of collaboration. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, Tima, thank you. So maybe one last question, then we'll go to the question and answers. And I want to go back to Leah on a government's perspective, a policy perspective, and particularly, you know, how the federal government and maybe your thoughts around more generally policy as a circular economy opportunity as well as investments fit into the federal government's recovery efforts right now and longer-term resiliency planning. So could you speak a little bit to how our federal government is approaching circular economy as a lens?
Great, thank you so much. So obviously the focus right now is very much, you know, making sure businesses have access to liquidity, getting Canadians back to work. But as other participants have highlighted, we really have an opportunity to create an economic recovery package that gets us the future we want. So one that's more resilient, sustainable, globally competitive, and one where Canada achieves net zero emissions by 2050. So I think that is an important policy question. I think the circular economy really offers some interesting value propositions. I mean, the momentum that was building before COVID-19 was really driven by the fact not only does circular economy offer some pretty interesting environmental benefits that other participants have highlighted, but it's really the economic value proposition as well. Competitiveness, new business models that open up new markets, the ability to be more sustainable. I think those were there before and are even more interesting now. I think COVID-19 has also unpacked even more benefits of circular economy approaches, and we've talked about resilient supply chains, but business models like remanufacturing, refurbishing, repair, reuse, product as service, these all drive products that are durable, where we keep materials at their highest value for as long as possible, more localized production, and just increase the supply. So I think those are important. So I would say we have a good foundation already in Canada. It is still early days, but it's very much a whole of government approach. I'm here from Environment and Climate Change Canada, but many of my sister departments and agencies are looking at circular economy across a wide range of sectors, most advanced in achieving zero plastic waste, but bioeconomy, metals and minerals, innovation, technology, clean technology, it's all there. So I think the questions we've asked, I mean, Tima mentioned it at the beginning, what are the opportunities for Canada? When we can really answer that, then, you know, and those are questions we're asking, that is what will help us really ensure circular economy is part of our economic recovery approaches.
Okay, thanks, Leah. I'm going to go to a question from the chat box. Nadine Kara put in the very first question. I think that ties in nicely, Leah, with your comment now. And the question is around, has anyone quantified the value proposition for Canada? And I know lots have worked on this, and I believe, Leah, ECCC has done some analysis on our competitive advantages or how Canada looks under a circular economy lens and the opportunities around that. Any comments to that in terms of work being done to quantify the value proposition for Canada? Still on mute.
Apologies. Obviously, Tima's study with the Canadian Council of Academies is a really important one, but we've already done a number of studies. We did a report with Deloitte on plastics that really quantified the opportunity there, looking at a circular economy approach. We're also leading a study now looking at the remanufacturing, repair, reuse policies in Canada from a sectoral lens and what the opportunities are. So, and then others are leading similar studies across the government, other levels of government, municipalities. So we're starting to build that evidence base, but I think there's still work to be done.
Great. A question from Belinda Lee, and this is talking about our current state in Canada, I believe. The question is around the focus right now on more of the outer loops of circular economy, which are words like reusing, recycling, recovering. What about inner loops, like prevention and the need for, reduction in general and new things, more specifically? So how do we move away from the idea of producing and then recycling versus redesign or thinking about reduction in general? Does anyone have any thoughts around that from our panel?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that. I agree with it. I almost think that in a certain way we need to look at recycling differently. We tended to prop it up as this fantastic thing when the recycling industry is riddled with problems. In particular, in my industry, when we pushed some really progressive policies here in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland for demolition waste to see it recycled, but what that means is you're having perfectly valuable materials go to a facility where it gets chipped up and then burnt for energy, and they call that recycling. So you're taking a valuable resource and burning it, and I don't think that that's progress. So I think it's really important that we understand recycling is downcycling, and we do move towards the, I guess, the inner loop, as the comment mentioned, and look at, primarily reducing our consumption, and then also remanufacturing, reuse, and continuing to circulate the goods. And really, we have to just admit that recycling is not the solution, and it's not this glorious thing that we've propped up for the last few decades.
Very briefly, I think the whole movement towards servitization, making products into services, is a large part of the business model moving forward. And by moving products into services, that means the products get used more. That means that we should be reducing the extraction of resources.
Right. We've got a question from Randy Tyrell that sort of ties into that. He provided an example of Adidas, who's selling over 1 million pairs of shoes made from ocean plastics. That was in 2018. So the question there is the recycled product demand a question of marketing clout? In other words, are there product demand, and is this a positioning statement, or is it actually making an impact?
I'm going to jump in there because that's my favorite topic, of course, procurement. We recently worked on a study on looking at how governments are buying across the country and the depth of integration of sustainability requirements, circular or otherwise, and it's pretty non-existent. So in my mind, procurement is the tool that we could be using. Yes, we could market the heck out of it, but HP just produced the world's first Chromebook, laptop, display with ocean-bound plastics. I can't tell you whether it's selling any better or not today, but I hope it would. And we really are hoping that it will push our competition into doing more, but the procurement is the key piece here, that the requirements need to be specified. We need stronger signals into the marketplace to do more in this space, and it won't happen without procurement coming along.
Any other thoughts on that?
Well, Paul, just to jump back to my comment, what the Adidas example is actually upcycling, not recycling. So again, it's framing what companies are doing, and it's misleading, because recycling is downgrading a good. If you're taking ocean plastic and adding value to it for a product, it's upcycling. It's fantastic, but it's confusing to people because it's technically not recycling, it's upcycling.
That's a good point, because Nadeem also commented around the fact that recycling is a very energy and resource-intensive process. So how do we look at those ways that are getting the highest value out of our what we're currently calling waste, but are really material resources that can be brought back into the supply chain.
I just want to jump in on that one. There's this assumption that to take materials back and ship them sometimes long distances in Canada, to extract the value out of those resources must always be more than using virgin, but actually it's not. We do a lot of LCA work, life cycle assessment work, and carefully evaluate, can we take those resources once they're returned back to us through our Planet Partners program, and we always find, particularly on the plastics side, a significantly lower, 30% lower virgin, 30% lower carbon footprint for recycled plastics, or upcycled as you want to call it, versus virgin. And I think what people forget is that to make virgin plastic is very energy and water intensive. And it's just because it's so ubiquitous that everybody forgets it has a high carbon footprint in the first place. So great question to pull up, and thank you for raising it, because I just wanted to set the record straight on that one.
Thanks, Francis. We have a question from a student at Waterloo. They wanted to ask if there's a study in place or a mechanism in making circularity more tradable. So in other words, enabling a lot of engagement from the private sector and trying to draw the connection to carbon credits, for example. So we've got a carbon trading mechanism. Is there a way to set something like this up for circularity to make it more market-based? Interesting question.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think we're missing some of the metrics that we need to be able to prove that something is more circular. HP just stepped into this by working with UL to get our plastics that are ocean-bound UL certified, so that vendors and buyers who want to buy with recycled or ocean-bound plastics can be sure that they're getting that. But we had to fund that work. Nobody else is going to fund that work. So we're lacking metrics and measurements that are simple and easy and don't add costs into the process. I mean, the last thing you want to do is make recycled plastic more expensive than virgin plastic, because you've got to put all these traceabilities and whatever into it. So it's a delicate balance. And I don't think anybody's figured that one out yet. And of course, with the crashing oil prices, we're really struggling. So at this point, the only way we're going to drive it is through procurement requirements, not nice to have, but specifications that products have to contain recycled content and should be offered as a service.
Paul, if I might make a provocative statement, I think that the problem lies, we can analyze this problem in a lot of detail, but one of the biggest issues is this demand for rapid product cycles. And if I'm going to get a new iPhone every 6 months, or a new pair of Adidas sneakers every 6 months, and as we have this fast fashion, this, I want to renovate my kitchen every few months, or every few years, sorry, that we will never get, the circularity problem will be a continuous problem. And if there is an opportunity on the table right now, that $20 bill that's lying around, is that opportunity to build products that are longer term, they're sustained over time, they're repairable, that are modular, that use upcycled products. I think that there is a real appetite among a large group of people, and I would argue my students, my business students, are far more aware of these issues than they ever have been. And so these companies that are in the consumer products area that provide sustained products that have longer life cycles, that's a way to achieve circularity from the bottom up.
It's a great point. I think that product life extension model is something that we can really do more to support with policy and incentives and moving that direction. We're seeing that obviously in Europe and places like France and other jurisdictions trying to move that forward. And I appreciate Francis's comment around the lack of data and transparency right now and metrics around how to measure circularity. I think those are all areas where we probably need more. David, I know you had to jump back in by phone. Are you able to hear us okay? Do you have any questions you want to bring forward from the Q&A?
Paul, thanks. Yeah, I just got back online, and I apologize to everyone for having dropped off. And I really, having missed most of the questions, I don't want to repeat. So I'll just leave it to you to guide this, and I'll pop in towards the end.
Sure, that sounds good. I might go to a question from Dharini, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his the name for first name properly. It's a question around extended producer responsibility, and that's sort of a policy mechanism that's been fairly well established across Canada, and in some jurisdictions more so than others, like here in British Columbia and more recently in Ontario. I'm wondering if maybe the business perspectives could speak a bit to how extended producer responsibility can be encouraged or incentivized within business models so that products are being captured and reused and reincorporated into products more effectively. How is that important for HP or for unbuilders, for example, and where do you see opportunities to do more there?
Well, I'll jump in and I'll state that, you know, EPR is always playing catch up. If you look at the number of products, even in a province like BC that's done so much work in this space, the percentage of goods that are regulated by EPR is pretty low compared to the full suite of goods that are sold in the province. So it's an old, slow tool to getting us to where we want to be. Procurement is much more nimble in terms of what it can do and how fast you can change it. You're not waiting for legislative changes, and sends a much faster, wider signal into the marketplace, which is why I spend so much time working on it. You know, if the BC government was to say everything that we buy that has plastic in it has to contain, you know, 20% post-consumer recycled content, imagine what an impact that would have on the EPR programs themselves, right? There'd be a huge demand for that plastic coming out of those programs and for it to be clean. So maybe there'd be more deposit returns, there'd be more, you know, across the country. So I'm totally convinced that EPR is the wrong tool. Yes, you have to have it, but it's not an effective way.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that mandatory recycled content, we're trying to work with the City of Vancouver to do that with construction and buildings too, to mandate a certain percentage of reclaimed materials, recycled materials within the new construction or renovations. Because again, we're going to have this supply and demand issue. And that's really why I actually came into launching Unbuilders. My background, I'm a certified passive house builder. I was building greenhouses or sustainable homes, I should say. But I quickly realized that the methods that we were using and the products we were using were single-use products and single-use methods. Even the best builders in the country who now unbuild with us are doing this. So it's looking at the entire system. Again, I'm just focusing on my industry because that's where my expertise lies. But the whole construction industry needs to be revamped. It's built on an old paradigm that is not the way forward. I love that Tima touched on servitization. That's big in our minds. There's just a lot of really exciting things that are gonna come to fruition over the next few decades to really transition my industry, but also every industry.
That's great. We've had some really great questions coming in, and they continue to come in, some really excellent comments and links to resources. We're going to compile all of those and do our best to answer those questions as part of a summary document coming out of today's webinar. So we won't get to all of the questions given the hundreds of people on the line. But given where we're at with time, David, I'm going to pass it back to you just to do a quick 1-2 minute wrap up.
And that's great. Thanks, Paul. And again, apologies, everyone. I had to drop off for a bit of time because of technology problems, but it's great that we were able to gather this group. We recognize as both the organizers and the panelists that we can only go so deep in one session. And so with that in mind, we want you all to stay tuned to a series of other dialogues and discussion sessions that we'll be organizing. We are hoping that this can be part of a regular series, a circular economy solution series of sorts that will be brought to you by the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition and Delphi. We're in the early stages of kind of discussing that and building an agenda for that. And we would welcome your suggestions on topics and ideas that you'd like us to drill deeper into in the weeks and months ahead. But we also have some other events that are already being planned by the Globe Virtual team. And the next one coming up, which we hope you can participate in, is on May 28th at 2 p.m. Pacific time. And the topic there is finding a job with purpose during a pandemic. And that's being done in collaboration with Leading Change Canada. We also have an event that we're in the works of planning together with the Natural Step Canada's Energy Futures Lab and Delphi and Globe. And that will be looking at innovation pathways and the transition finance towards future fit hydrocarbons. We expect that to be in late June, and that promises to be a very exciting and interesting event. And again, we want to remind people that the World Circular Economy Forum online, WCEF online, will be taking place at the end of September, and you'll be seeing more and more information about that. Leah Canning is leading that together with her partners from Citra and with the rest of the Government of Canada and partners like the partners on this call. And so with that, we're going to wind it up. We thank everybody for participating, and please stay tuned. We've really just scratched the surface of a very important and exciting topic that we expect to be something that we're all going to need to be delving deeper into in the months and years ahead. And stay safe, and thanks for participating. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the panel. Take care.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye.